Okay, in this writing workshop, I'm going to give you some tips for your final revisions in the effort that you will get an A+. So just to review, this is 25% of your final grade, which is a large amount. It's one of the biggest of the semester. This means that it can boost your grade. So you can do better in the class if you do really well on this paper. So do take your time, give yourself plenty of time to work on this, and review this presentation and the instructions very carefully. So you want to look at the bottom category here to get an A, and you're going to do three things. You're going to go back and you're going to make sure that in a paragraph or less that you clearly indicated a specific quote and tell me that it surprised you and how it surprised you from the reading. Okay, you can also use an example. If you are struggling with trying to find a quote, you can use the example from the reading. In other words, paraphrase it, but a specific quote is even better. The next thing you do is you need to inform me that you understand that you generated a question based on your surprise. So when you're surprised about something, there should be questions about why you were surprised, why it's new information, what more information would you want to better understand that thing that was surprising to you. And so again, this really only needs to be a paragraph because you're going to then set that up for the third part, which is now you're going to show me that the Constitution is not one thing and that law is not just a command. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take a logical observation of a hypothesis, now that you're thinking about what surprised you and what question you have, and now give me a theory, give me a hypothesis about what this means to have different constitutions, cultures, and laws all working together in our social relations, right? There's not one set thing that everybody follows. That's a common misconception. And so now you got to show me that you've been learning in this semester about how each of these groups are kind of competing for their own perception or their own interpretation of law to be applied in their particular circumstances. And be very careful and specific about what you mean by the terms law, culture, and constitutions. Don't copy and paste from the internet. The most important thing to get this A or the A+ is you have to show me that there are different meanings of law, that law is not one thing. So don't overgeneralize about laws being good or bad. Don't talk about stereotypes. And don't try to create as if there's only one type of law in the world. Okay? Show that your point of view is going to be different than other points of view. So you could talk about your culture, my culture, their culture. Show that different cultures are going to have different interpretations and experiences with law and the Constitution in the United States. Understand there's not one cultural meaning of law. There's no such thing as American culture. And so we each kind of bring our own cultural heritage and our own ways of thinking into the constitutional law framework. Please, please, please remember there are 51 constitutions in the United States, and they all represent different groups of people. So the Constitution in New York is different than the Constitution in California, different than that's in Michigan. All over the country, there's different constitutions that say different things because they represent different cultural groups. People have different ways of thinking about the law. The 51st one, the federal Constitution, is not about balancing rights. You could argue that that's what it should do, but this one, as it's written, does not do that. It favors economic rights. It favors those people with property, which at the founding, at the writing of the Constitution, were men from England who had property. So everyone else was not included in thinking about rights in the original Constitution, and that's the one we still follow. That's the one that set up all the rules of the game, and that in its own way is a bit of the culture of law. Now, people have been struggling. They've been working against each other, right? They've been trying to get recognition under that document. And so that's what the courts are trying to figure out, is whose rights are they going to interpret? So they're trying to balance the interest between people because the Constitution does not do that. Law does not do that. That's why judges exist. They have to try to balance that, as well as the Congress, as well as the legislators, right? So people are all trying to manage the system even though it doesn't provide a clear one way of doing things. You really have to show me you understand that. That's probably the threshold concept. The main, most important concept is that the law is not one thing. Here's an example from a student who received an A. So notice the very first thing. Nothing is copied and pasted from the internet. Okay, they're taking the quote, they put it in here, they gave me the citation, and then they explained why it surprised them. That's a perfect example. Notice it's only a paragraph long. Okay, so part 1 and part 2 shouldn't be more than 1 page. Now, most people struggled with part 2. So let me give you 3 good ideas that you need to focus on and then talk about it. You need to connect your question to a thesis. So this is a little tricky, but this is part of college writing, is that something surprised you. So then a question came into your mind. You wrote down that question. So now the next step is to start to theorize, have a hypothesis about that. What do you think the answer is? And that should talk about the difference between laws, constitutions, and cultures. You should be starting to see that because that's what those 2 readings are talking about. And then you should cite examples and avoid answering with your unreasoned political opinion. A lot of people started kind of forgetting the reading, and then they started talking about what they thought about specific issues. That's not what this paper is about. I don't think that's a good paper in any class, to be blunt with you, but this is certainly not what a legal class paper is about. So here I give an example of the student that said this, what they've probably heard. You would hear in an elementary school class, they say, our federal government. Well, what on earth is an our federal government, right? At the very least, there's Republicans and Democrats as the 2 major parties in the federal government. They do not agree with each other. If you look at the demographics, on average, Republicans tend to be older white men. On average, Democrats tend to be younger people of color. Those are different cultural backgrounds. They have different understandings. They have different interpretations. Now, that's not even the majority of the people in the United States. The majority of the people in the United States are not in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And so there's no such thing as our federal government. We don't share it, right? If anything, we're all competing for influence within that structure. You have to show me you understand that. You also have to show me that this doesn't make any sense when you think about it at the formation of the Constitution, right? In the 1780s, only white men from England with property were included as citizens. Everyone else, the other 99% of the country, were excluded. And so you have to show how is this struggle, right, been embraced by people who were never intended to be inside of the Constitution. What does this say about Constitution, laws, and cultures as people are struggling for these rights? That's what you need to be talking about, not your political opinion. The third section is the most important one. And so you need to start about how your ideas have changed. So I like the way this student set this up. I feel like my ideas on laws, cultures, and constitution have been broadened. And then they talk about the difference. And they start to think about how civilizations are different, about there's language, there's history. And so the constitutions don't necessarily represent the same people now as when they were written. And what does that struggle and how are these groups trying to get influence through that? Make sure you relate it back to the reading. Okay, so you kind of start with what surprised you, then end with that. Bring those 2 things together. That's always a good idea in every class paper that you write. Whatever you start with, bring it back together at the end. Now, you really need to start talking about at this point about how your own cultural interpretation, every single one of us has a cultural history, right? Our families all come from places. We have certain beliefs. We have certain languages. We have certain ways of making sense of the universe, okay? And they're all different. Some of us are more similar to others, but we didn't grow up in the same family. And so we have different ways of interpreting things, including laws and the Constitution. You want to start thinking about that in relationship to other people. So you want to think about how those are different and really think about how your ideas have been broadened or they've changed because you're now being aware of how other people view this differently than you do. Now, check your paper for spelling, okay? Grammar is a debatable concept. Spelling is not, right? And spelling is important because I need to know what words you're trying to say, and so I can better understand what you're talking about. Grammar, on the other hand, or writing academically or any of those other things, I'm not really interested in that. I want you to talk the way that's most comfortable for you, the way you would use your own voice. Like when we talk to each other over Zoom or back when we used to be in the classroom or when I'd listen to you on the subway, use that way of talking and then quote to the reading. You can and also you should relate this to any other reading from the course to help deepen your understanding. Don't be afraid to use more than one reading. This is primarily about one of the two readings, Clash of the Civilizations or Quest for Legal Sovereignty, but if another reading helps you understand this concept, definitely talk about it. And then A+ answers will show me the systemic side of this, that you'll understand why different social norms influence what people think about criminal deviant behavior and why that leads to stereotypes, labeling, and the unequal policing of people of color in the United States. That's a historical story, and that's a framework that's existed throughout this process. Finally, make sure your name is in the paper and name the file with your last name and email your draft to me at my CUNY address before December 6th as a Word, PDF, or Google Doc, and keep a copy of for your records.